everyone, and a very warm welcome to the first global conversation of the year on top talent tactics. For those of you I haven't met before, my name is Syl Saller, and I'm president of the Marketing Society. And I can't think of a more important topic than the one we're going to cover today: how to attract the right talent. Now, contrary to what many, including me, predicted at the beginning of the pandemic, that there would be significant unemployment, the battle for talent has never been more fierce. Many companies have experienced greater attrition for a variety of reasons, so the need to adopt new, more effective ways of attracting and retaining talent has never been greater. So today, in true Marketing Society style, we bring 4 global leaders together to discuss how they approach attractive talent to their companies. Now, retaining talent is, of course, a critical issue and perhaps the more important one. But my observation is that many companies understand how to do this better than they do finding top talent that is right for their companies externally. So given time, we'll focus on that. We'll discuss the challenges these leaders are facing and what they found has worked, and just importantly, what hasn't and what they've learned along the way. My hope is that they will share ideas that will be useful for you, because that's the point of the society engendering conversations like this. So to make sure this serves your needs, please use the chat function throughout. You can keep the discussion going, you can add your opinion, anything on the chat. We'd also love to have your specific questions. And for that, we have a Q&A facility. You can see that down, depending on the device you're on the bottom of your screen. So keep your questions pithy and let me know which contributor your question is for. And our hope is that we have time to answer these later on. Although occasionally, if I can keep my eye on the chat, the answer's the time, I will bring in one of your questions during, if it's relevant to the point that we're making. So keep it lively. This is for you. It's meant to be a conversation. And now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our speakers. Ben Wiseman, co-founder of Zigzag, an organization that creates more human, respectful experiences for talent looking for new roles. Nellie Chan, head of Google Customer Solutions for Google Hong Kong. Dan Gilbert, CEO Brain Labs, a digital marketing agency that uses a test and learn approach to growing businesses. And Doug Stratton, Chief Digital Officer at the Hershey Company. He is also an active consultant and marketing advisor. So we have amazing panelists from around the world, and I think you're going to hear incredibly different and useful perspectives. I won't ask everyone all the questions, but I do want to start with the first 2 and ask each of you, why is the topic of managing talent important to each of you personally? So Ben, why don't we start with you?
So afternoon, everyone, or good morning, wherever everyone is in the world. I came into the talent industry actually as relatively recently as a marketer, and I came back from a stint in San Francisco and was looking at what are the different industries that are doing a great job of customer experience and who's not doing a good job of customer experience. And it was just around the time when things were, when it was quite difficult for talent to get hold of roles. And I was absolutely amazed at the number of people I would speak to and observe having dreadful talent experiences, when at the same time, the world of marketing has got so fantastic at creating respectful, authentic, valuable customer experiences. So I am now spending my time working with businesses to work out how can we take some of that marketing prowess that exists in the industry and start to translate that into brilliant talent experiences that attracts and retains talent. And it's a real conundrum. It's not easy to do. If it were, we wouldn't all be sitting around this table today, which is, I think, what makes it so juicy. And I think why, as marketers, we have a special role to play in this challenge of making talent acquisition and attraction more engaging, more valuable for the talent side of the table.
And that's so needed. I mean, I coach a number of clients who are in the job hunt phase, and it's essentially career coaching. And I could add to your list of horror stories from pretty well-known companies. So really
Oh
thrilled
yeah.
you're doing what you're doing. Nellie, over to you. Why is it important to you personally?
Well, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. So I think I'll talk about it through my own personal experience. So when I was working for a company that like they really invested and thought about, my own personal development, and not just, within the organization, but also like, really prepare myself to, think about what's my career, my next play outside the organization. It's really made me want to do a lot more, for my role and for my company, instead of just thinking about it, my job is just a job. So I become part of the company, and the company kind of become part of me. And that's why I think, like, from managing a talent perspective, if we can, make the talent feel that they are part of the company, and you become part of them, I think that's as important for both parties.
Thanks, Nellie. Dan, what are your thoughts?
I think for me, I run a marketing agency, and so it's kind of obvious to me that people are the product. So when it comes to talent acquisition and retention, that's literally our raison d'etre. It's our only purpose is to bring in great talent and help them thrive. So it's less obvious, perhaps, in a Diageo, for example, Zil, but I think we talk about technology, systems, processes. Even with technology, it's still people that build the technology, and it's the same at Google, right? Like, bring in the finest people that you can find, and that's how you determine the quality of your product. So I really don't think there's anything more complicated that in building any of our businesses or marketing departments or teams than talent. Like, that's the game that we're all in. It was interesting that you referred to the kind of this battle war for talent, and we might come on to that later. But to me, that's always been what it is. Maybe the recent events have kind of highlighted how important talent is. But for me, that was job number one from day one: is bring in the best possible talent you can, and then through culture, create the conditions for them to do the best work of their career. But certainly number one. So I'm all about talent. Yeah.
Yeah, we probably could have a very long conversation. I'd love to at some point about why so many agencies don't understand that managing their people and their talent is job one.
Yeah.
Because it's kind
of it's like job one.
It's a competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Doug, your thoughts?
Yeah. So first, thanks for having me, Sil. I really appreciate it. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody on the call. I think it really honestly boils down to one thing, which is we're all accountable in some way, shape, or form for some sort of result within our organization. And it depends on what type of organization you are. So I typically have worked for big public companies, and obviously, your key business outputs are critical. You've got responsibilities to your shareholders and all the other stakeholders, quite frankly, involved in your company. So if you don't have the right talent to support the goals of the overall company, then you're lost. So regardless of your own individual perspectives, you have to think about there's a job to be done, and how do you achieve that on a more personal level. I think it's absolutely critical, obviously, to surround yourself with really, really good people, particularly people that can collaborate, regardless of whether an individual leader or more of a team oriented. You have to figure out a way to put those puzzle pieces together, and how you nurture that, I think, has a long way, or a big part in managing through attrition, and it also has a big part in actually attracting and recruiting new talent. So for me, it comes down to those two things. The first one being the results, and the second thing is, how do you build a team around you to make sure that you can deliver on those results.
Thanks, Doug. So one more question for everyone, and that is, people often learn from examples. So I'd love to hear each of you describe one of the major challenges that you've had in the past, whatever company, or for Ben, it might be a client. One of the major challenges you've had in overcoming finding great talent, and how did you do it? Let's start with Nellie on this one.
Sure. So a lot of people that I spoke with always have an impression that, oh, you're Google, so it can't be too hard for you to find great talent, right? Yes, at Google, we do have a pretty strong, employer brand, which helps to attract a lot of great talents. But for us, I have to say, one of the, major challenges that so far we find is like, we have a lot of talents that they're interested to join Google. Okay, but not necessarily they're 100% buy into the role that they're applying for sometimes. This is a different type of challenge, I would say. And for us, ultimately, great talent is great talent, okay? So they're hard to find. So for us, it's like we always want to make sure that we set very clear expectation of what the role is at the very beginning, and make sure that, the talent is really qualified for that. Then, of course, we also want to make sure that they understand we're very open, and actually we're very supportive of mobility within the organization. It's like, one of the company I work with, to see the mobility that in the organization is crazy. But since they hire for a specific role, so we want to make sure that hey, you need to be able to deliver and excel in that role before, they should consider their next move within the organization. Because ultimately, the next hiring manager for sure will look at their performance in their existing role. So that's why for us, it's like we work very closely with our hiring and recruitment team to make sure that the talent is, yes, we love people to be, excited to join Google, but at the same time, they need to understand, really set the right expectation of the role that they are signing up for in a way.
Thanks. Ben, your thoughts? You must have a lot of encounters of people struggling with this.
Yeah, I mean, I was also just thinking from I think the time that I probably felt most burned by a really difficult moment in this was, heading out. I went out for a few years to San Francisco, and the task was go and start a new office for an agency, an Omnicom agency out there. And it seemed like just the most exciting thing, because we had a great proposition, a really great methodology that we were working to, great track record, and a phenomenal roster. And so the number one challenge was, let's find some people out in San Francisco who will be able to deliver on all of this. And because of some of the things that Nellie was mentioning just there, it's quite a hot market in San Francisco. We were both competing with some of your colleagues, Nellie, to find talent, but also working for Google and Facebook and the big business out there. So that the challenge was, how do we bottle what was great about us? And I think we had started, I went out there with this kind of perspective that, well, obviously people will want to come and work with us because what we're doing is really great, and we're going to work with, and we are starting to work with the best companies in the world. Why wouldn't you want to do this? And then I realized, well, in market, everyone's either working with or for the best companies in the world, so that's not quite enough. So what we set out to do, and this has actually informed quite a lot of what we now work on in Zigzag, is three things really. Firstly, we spent quite a lot of time taking our own medicine and thinking about what does make us unique and special in a way that will actually add to people's careers. We felt that actually in a locations, it was different location specific for that, given the context. So, it was stuff like, well, we are a startup agency, but we have this extraordinary proven methodology that we can explore. We really lent into the growth mindset. So, that allowed for a very different type of career progression. The second thing we did was really open the aperture for where we might be hiring from. So probably the first thing I did was take away degree requirements once I realized this is going to be quite tricky. That was super controversial at the time, and it took me quite a little while to get to work people around for that. But there were quite a few things that we just took as read, that we realized that actually the type of people that we wanted, it didn't matter whether they had some of the things that we had always assumed needed to be table stakes. And then I think the last thing that we did was we looked really hard at our own biases and preconceptions about what what would make a good person in our organization. And we'd always in other offices been really proud of building a particular type of culture around a particular type of persona. And going into a new location gave us the opportunity to think, well, what could we let go of, or what biases have we retained that actually might be making life a little bit harder for us? So that meant we ended up blinding CVs to names, to education, to location, to all kinds of different elements that allowed us, I think, just to think a little bit differently about the biases that we might have, not just gender and ethnicity and some of the kind of more headline biases that we're all talking about, but also some of the internal cultural biases that we had within the agency that we knew we had to crack if we were going to move into a new market.
Yeah, that blind recruiting stuff is so interesting. Doug, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think in terms of an example, I would echo back to what Nellie was talking about. So I've been working for big CPGs, world-class, very large CPGs and some mid-sized CPGs. And so, which have very good, brand names or houses of brands and very good equity, typically with prospective employees. Over the last 10 years, there's clearly been the sexiness of the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons and whatnot. And in some cases, we actually needed skill sets that germinated in some of those companies. And it's been very difficult, obviously, to recruit out of those companies. And so I think the example for me that's been successful is honestly kind of understanding the psychology of the candidates and how to lure them or recruit them from those types of environments into environments which are just as fruitful, actually, from an experience and career progression perspective, but maybe a lot less sexy than some of the things Ben was referring to in San Francisco. Though it's all a matter of perspective. And so the way I addressed it as I've been recruiting in those channels is to think about, if you look at the backgrounds of most of these candidates and you start to get to know them, you're dealing with a lot of people that are highly educated, very ambitious, typically high achievers. And the pitch that I've given them is, given all the other things that are right about the propositions for the companies that I've worked for, whether it's from D&I or ESG or whatever it might be, is to talk to them about their own individual contributions within the company or the context that they're currently in. And I'll give you an example. So if you're in a company that's growing by 20% per year, and it's been growing 20% per year for 5 years, and you're coming to me and you're saying, well, why would I leave a company where I'm growing my business 20%? And a lot of times the argumentation has been, well, your entire company is growing by 20%. So is it all you? So maybe what you want to do is you want to take your big brain and your education, your experience, and come into an environment that's relatively slow growth, and then show us what you can do. And if you can grow that by double digits, then you are truly what you think you are, what you believe to be, which is a rock star. And so it's kind of like really getting to understand and know the motivations of that individual candidate that you're targeting for whatever position, and understanding what's really motivating them. And it's really, really interesting how many people will actually really gravitate towards, yeah, I am part of this company, and whether I stay or I go, it's still going to grow by 20%. Maybe I can go into this other environment, still get a really fruitful experience with world-class brands, but like really demonstrate what I can do in a tougher environment from an organic growth perspective. So I think that's been really, really, a critical insight for me, is really understanding the individuals, what makes them tick, and designing a story which allows them to think, I should really do this. Maybe it's a little bit less sexy, but ultimately I'll be better off from a career perspective.
Absolutely. I'm going to hop around here a little bit because we have 2 questions on the chat. The one that relates to what you're saying, Doug, that I'd like to answer as well is from Mark Simmons, if I'm pronouncing that right. Are big companies like Diageo, Unilever, Coca-Cola exciting and entrepreneurial enough for Gen Zers? And it's a great question. I think adding to what Doug was saying, I would say that is not the only motivation Gen Z has. And it is really important to understand what people want and whether or not we can deliver that, you know, in terms of large corps. I mean, one of my involvements in the recruiting process was actually to spend time with people who were thinking about coming and start the conversation with, this is a more important decision for you than it is for us. Tell me what you're really looking for, and then give them a really honest answer about whether or not the company could meet those needs. From a Diageo perspective, and I'm wondering about Hershey, I would say, you know, we couldn't meet the entrepreneurial need the way, for example, I started a venture arm for Diageo for spirits. And when you see those entrepreneurs, if someone has that kind of motivation, they're probably not going to be happy inside Diageo. But boy, are we working on, I would say we, sorry folks, I've retired, but is the company really working on becoming that entrepreneurial? Yes. And yes, it is exciting. So back to you, Doug, you know, when someone says they're looking for, you know, something really entrepreneurial and exciting, and you're talking about, say, a lower growth but more challenging environment at Hershey, do you think you can deliver that, or are there other benefits that that, you know, could be important to candidates?
Well, in the area that I've been focusing on, both at Hershey and at Unilever, I did have the ability to actually design things, because I was in and before that I was in a startup which was acquired by Unilever, right? So I haven't worked on anything that's grown less than double digits and faster than market growth, category growth,
right,
in over 25 years. So my DNA is a little bit different from a typical big company guy. And so I've gravitated towards the roles within those companies that are very white space and are undefined. And I help define them for those companies and then kind of like bring them up to speed. So in my case, it has been I have had the ability to influence, like, yeah, I can get you, this is a higher growth, this is a bit sexier part of the company. But within that, you know, I've typically kind of flaunted a lot of flexibility in terms of, you know, people get hung up on titles, or they want a very specific this or that. And, you know, I've had situations, and I won't tell you which company, but I basically said, I don't care if you're the director of rainbows and unicorns, you know, we can call you whatever makes you feel happy, but your remit is going to be this. And here are the things that I need you to get done. And here's what I can do from a career pathing perspective, both within the function that I control and then with the influence that I have with other stakeholders in the building. And that can work, right? Now, you need to have a really good partnership, obviously, with your management and with HR to make those things happen. But once you've just demonstrated results, and once you've demonstrated you can get talent in, you'd be surprised, I think, at how flexible the big company structures can be, as long as you're well prepared and you have the appropriate proposition and backup for what you're trying to do.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And if you can deliver that, that is great. Nellie, where are you on this question, where the assumption is Google is a sexy company, but it is big. So if someone has really entrepreneurial instincts, do you really feel you as a company can deliver that to them? It may depend on which part of the world you're in with Google.
Yeah, I think, yes. So I guess which part of the world that you are at Google, and also which business unit that you are in, also will, you know, look at it slightly differently. I can say that, like, for me now sitting in Hong Kong, part of, you know, this exciting region within Greater China, definitely there's a lot of entrepreneurial spirit here, because, like, you know, again, a lot of the times when we're talking about doing business in Asia is very different from the rest of the world, and which it is, because it's not one region, it's every small little market that we're working on. So we working for an organization as big as Google's, definitely you need to have that entrepreneurial spirit to actually, well, sometimes, as we said, is like really push the boundary, you know, because like definitely it works in the US for a lot of ways that they are working on. But might not necessarily work in our region and in a market only have 7.5 million of population in like Hong Kong. So it really depends on the leader how we actually be able to speak for the market and be able to while we try to localize as much as possible of some of the global framework and structure that we want to get the scale, but at the same time also understanding the market. I mean, it's also very important on tracking talent, because like talent join a company, yes, knowing it's Google, but at the same time they also want to make sure that like Google is sitting in Hong Kong, so you should understand Hong Kong well enough and understand the talent well enough what we are looking for. So I do think that is still very important for the entrepreneurial spirit, but yeah, it will differ from different markets and different units.
Yeah, that's a great overall framework for people to think, is to think about what the progression might look like, what the mobility might look like. I mean, for Diageo in Africa, if a marketing leader wants make or break experience in some of Diageo's markets there, you'd be like, well, no data, route to market is patchy, you need to develop it, but get on with it. And people have made their careers there for sure. Let's see, Dan, I want to come to you with another question for the chat. How important is it for companies to promote and foster a climate of day-to-day creativity to attract and maintain top marketing talent? So I'm curious if you can think about that from your agency's point of view, but also, do you see your clients doing anything to keep their people creative?
It's super interesting, Sal, and I think it ties back into the conversation that we've just been having. Because I think for any given organization, you can be whatever you want to be as a talent proposition. But I think the most important lesson that I can share from my experience in this space is making sure that it's authentic. And with respect, funnily enough, I have first experience of applying to Google, and that was where I started my career. And there's been a dramatic change actually in the way that Google has changed their people proposition, because it's one of the most incredible people-led organization. But when I joined, they were specifically prioritizing entrepreneurial graduates. And I was definitely in that bracket, right? I failed 50 other graduate interviews at PwC and KPMG, and they knew they were right, because there was that entrepreneurial spirit. But I also didn't last very long at Google, and neither did any of my cohort, because they had hired, they hired what they wanted, which was entrepreneurial graduates. And then after a while, they realized, hey, actually, I can do entrepreneurial stuff, but I really do have a genuine entrepreneurial spirit. I want to be an entrepreneur and I want to go and start something, which is what I did. And 90% of my 30 Noogler cohort actually did. And I think the message, like Google learned that fast, right? They changed the entry requirements. They changed exactly what they were looking for, and were more careful about the language that they were using, because no, they didn't want to hire entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs left and started businesses. So they changed it. And it's different language, it's different criteria that they're looking for. And I would say I've had the same experience in Brain Labs. The people that we're hiring now as a nearing 1,000-person company are really different to the language that we used when we were 2 people at the beginning, because it's not the same person, it's not the same personality that you need. And sometimes it just took us too long to update the narrative and the EVP to be genuine about what we actually were, to look introspectively and say, no, this is really what it is. And it's like nice to use that language, and it's nice to say those things, or we aspire to be those things. But if it's not true, then you might be able to attract talent, but you certainly won't be able to retain it. So I think my message in all of that is really drilling down to like what you genuinely are, and different things for different people. Relating back to the creativity point, sure, some organizations are designed specifically to be creative, but if you're not, then don't use the word. Like you just disappoint people. What is it like? Expectation setting is probably the number one, like in an authentic manner.
Thank you very much. Okay, a question for Ben and the other panelists might have great examples here, so do the hand raise we talked about. To what extent have you experienced what people are calling, post-pandemic, the great attrition? And what are you doing to deal with the impact of that? I mean, for those who don't know, the great attrition, people, for whatever reason, ongoing pandemic, have to be home with their kids, like flexibility, decide to stay home, decide they're reevaluating their life, moving to something else. It's McKinsey does quite a good job covering the topic if anybody's interested. So Ben.
I mean, I feel like I've got a great ringside view of this right now, because that, we are, we partner with the Marketing Society on this. We're kind of actively exploring what does it feel like for people to be needing to move right now, and it is real. It is real, but and McKinsey, as you say, Silo, fantastic on this. But it's real. It's real in the numbers. Just within marketing in the UK right now, we estimate there are probably about 40,000 marketing roles in the UK that are being advertised. I mean, it's just insanity, because there are probably only 200,000 people that would call themselves marketers. In the market like that. So it is real by the numbers, but it's also real for people in their lives. And I think this is perhaps the thing that the thing that is interesting for us as marketers to explore is why is this happening, and what is it that people are looking for? Because I think that plays both in retention and attraction. And candidates, we observe and hear from candidates that what they're looking for are that they've had this time to reflect, an awful lot of time to reflect, because there hasn't really been a huge amount else to do. And so there's a new opportunity for growth that comes out of what, for many people, even though it's been for many very stressful and difficult and busy, it hasn't felt good the last couple of years to people. So there's a kind of a new chapter that people are leading, and there's kind of freshness that a lot of talent are looking for. We hear that a lot in the marketing space. So new people to work with and to learn from, new experiences, a new brand. A new brand can be helpful to apply your brains to. Even like new home offices on Zoom to look at. It's just, it's something fresh. But also on the company side, back in September 2020, so Campaign were reporting that 40,000 jobs had been lost in the last couple of months at that point in the UK. So, and I know I'm just talking about the UK for now, but it kind of acts as kind of a good example. And we're now at the opposite end, where we've got about that number being recruited for right now. So I think that talent is looking both to backfill and to go into a whole new load of talent, of capability that they haven't really been looking for. But in the past, we see a lot of analog brands looking to bring in tons of digital talent, and so that the shape is changing. So I mean, it is complex, and there's lots of stuff that's going on, but I think that the thing that is missing, perhaps, that in the conversation is what we as marketers do quite well, which is look at the motivations that exist underneath why people are moving, and use that to enhance our attraction and particularly our retention strategy. And it is quite astonishing that so much hiring still hasn't really changed since the 70s or the 80s, in that it might be slightly digitized, in that you email your CV or you send it into an ATS system, but the way it's still a job spec, and it's still mostly a CV, and it's still probably an interview, and the way in which we engage is still like a tactical, here's what I've got to sell, do you want it, are we a match, great, let's move on. And so I think now the companies that we see who are really standing out and winning in this moment of where there's great attrition and a big desire to attract are the people who are really thinking about what are the motivations of the talent who are looking to grow in the next phase of their career, and how do we really show what's unique about us and help people to connect with us as the next stage of their career.
And just having that conversation is so critical. I'm surprised when people don't.
It's a real specialty of the recruitment industry, actually, is to talk but not really to listen. Unfortunately, we look across multiple different industries. I would say that the biggest bun fight right now is happening in marketing. and,
Right.
and digital product as well, but marketing is very hot right now.
Yeah.
And we are uniquely positioned as marketers to help our talent acquisition teams to think a little differently about how they might want to engage with talent and treat them as customers.
Yeah, and if you guys already have or are developing a reputation for honesty rather than shoving a candidate into a slot, that is, you know, the biggest competitive advantage I can imagine. So yeah, this theme of honesty is really important both ways. Sometimes it's up to us as leaders to open up that conversation. So Graham's asked a really interesting question. What do the panel think about encouraging side hustles to help employees scratch their entrepreneurial itch? And while you guys are thinking about that, I'll give my own example. Executive transitions are planned for a long time. So I was in a conversation with the CEO of Diageo, Ivan, you know, up to 2 years of advance of when I thought I wanted to retire. And I said, listen, I want to become an executive coach. That means I start to like take on clients now. And let's be really transparent about it. Is that okay? And the answer was yes, an unquantified yes, because it met their needs to keep me and my needs to get some experience before, you know, not just be starting when I retired. And there's a number of people I can think of so easily where they've just told me what their personal need is, whether it's flexible working, to do something on the side, to establish themselves in a new market, to plan to leave Diageo. I had someone who was planning to leave Diageo, but really needed an entrepreneurial experience before he left. And I found him that job because he was going to leave anyway, right? And he was really good at it. He was very good at many things. So there's lots that you can do if you open up that honest conversation. Any other examples from you guys where you've met a particular, sorry, I say you guys a lot, are wonderful panelists. Any examples where people have just said, this is my personal need, and you've been able to do that for them? Doug talked about titles. Are there other?
Yeah, in my experience, constantly. So a relatively large team at the Hershey company and at a relatively, you know, large team also at Unilever. I made a point of getting to know everybody regardless of work level. I'm very like, you know, blind to the whole work level thing. I think if you're an intelligent human being with, you know, with talents, that you should be listened to. So, you know, I carved time, and, you know, my direct reports who managed other people also carved time out to have conversations with people. And there's no agenda. The agenda is whatever the employee wants to bring to the meeting.
Yeah.
And so I think you can be honest with people, but I don't think that is actually, that's only part of the equation. It goes back to what, you know, Ben was saying, you know, you need to listen to people and get to know people. And if you just listen and get to know them, and again, go back to what you were just mentioning, Sandra, like what are their motivations? What's going to make them tick? I think you can stave off a huge portion of your attrition. I had very low attrition over the last 10 years in my groups because I was able to design new experiences for people. That was actually one of the favorite parts of my job.
Yeah.
And during the pandemic, I think out of a relatively large team, I lost one person, and that person decided to come back. So, you know, I think that was in large part, not totally, it had a lot to do with what the company, how the company was responding overall, but a lot of it was, you know, being honest with people, what you can and cannot do, but also really listening to what they could do. And in terms of side hustles, totally condone it. Like if that fills the need and burns off the energy that they need to burn off in a creative way, then I think it's totally fine as long as the results are coming in.
Super. Any other examples along those lines? Because we have another question from our audience.
I was just going to jump in there and just build on what Doug had said, because I agree completely, and extend it slightly beyond to a kind of more bird's eye view than just should you allow them to have side hustles? Because, you know, I agree the answer is yes. I think the sooner that this group and all of the folks that we work in, because I know what market we're in, which is marketing talent, is that the sooner we realize that we work for our talent and not the other way around,
Yeah.
We'll start to make some of the decisions that that allow us to attract and retain great talent. And that is an odd dynamic, and you do need to balance that against, like, no, everyone can't just have what they ask for and treat work as though it's kind of a hobby. But you want top talent, and that's what we're talking about here. And other people are going to want that talent too. So I think a level beyond servant leadership, where our jobs as leaders or managers or coaches is to bring out the best in people, is realizing that people have choices. So you need to be the best, and you need to serve people's careers in the best way that you possibly can.
Great, thanks so much, Dan. We have a question from Landon, and it says, at our event yesterday, we heard from our speakers that in the early stages of careers, it is more important to specialize. But I would like to hear from the panel whether there is a place where young generalists can thrive. Ben.
I profess a massive bias on this, but I think it depends on the individual and what brings them energy and joy. My bias is I found marketing and the various places that's taken my career by starting my career on a production line at Cadbury, just to bring all of the confectioners together, Doug. I started in manufacturing and had an amazing first few years of my career with, on a grad scheme at Cadbury Schweppes, as it was back then. And I found that fueled the first 10 years of my career, but as being a great generalist that could help people connect the dots. And that's not to say that another brain wouldn't do brilliantly in another way, shooting up a ladder or building depth of experience. My brain doesn't do that as well. And so I don't think that there's a particular line, or that is kind of a good way or not a good way, but I think that insight is important. And I'm grateful for those that took a punt on me as we went through to say, oh, sure, this guy that's got absolutely no marketing experience might be interesting in a marketing role, despite the fact that he's only ever managed production lines before. But that's great. And what that means is that as leaders, we need to be open to the idea of mobility. And I have to say that's easier to do internally. And I think the challenge for us is, as there is this, big scrap fight for great marketing, what are we doing to help us do it even better externally? Are we really looking for potential? Are we hiring for potential as well externally as we might be promoting internally as well? So I think, to answer the original question, I think it's about the person having the right kind of insight to know what's going to be a good start for their brain early on in their careers. I know what worked, for the first few years of mine.
Yeah, and my guess is you showed something that made people think that you had potential to do more. And I think that's really interesting. So my next question for anybody on the panel who wants to answer it is, what you're looking for might vary by job, but are there things that you consistently look for in people to become part of your culture, or to navigate a whole host of jobs? So, for example, Diageo had its values and it had its leadership standard, and those were used. But we also worked with YSC, and they had a really simple model that I thought held true for marketers who would come in all kinds of, shapes and sizes and all the diversity in the world. And that was, thinking about people in terms of their judgment, their drive, and their influence. So their judgment when faced with a situation, are they usually going to kind of have a sense of the right thing to do? Their drive, and I don't usually look at that as drive to get ahead for themselves, but drive for the business, enthusiasm, passion, and influence. Can they persuade people? Those were some common characteristics that when I was interviewing people, I thought about. So other thoughts from our panel, and feel free to put yours on the chat. on what general characteristics might you be looking for in people for your company, or in recruiting them, or in your agency?
Maybe I'll jump in on
Right.
this one. I think so I guess one things that we always talk about in our region is like, being Chinese or Asian culture, sometimes working in a big organization or in a Western culture environment is like, there's a bit of a culture differences sometimes. And I think one of the things that I feel like no matter what cultural background it is, one element that I think is very important for me to when I'm looking into talent is like the person can show that they're being humble uh, in a lot of ways. Because like you can still be very confident about what you know and what you can deliver, and you're passionate about things. But I think the humbleness is important. Is very, because like with the humbleness, then you'll be able to continue to feel like you want to learn, you want to, receive feedback and listen to feedback and all this. So I think it's not just, some people said that, oh, it's a very Asian culture or whatever. I think it's not necessary. I think fundamentally when I'm doing hiring, I think from a candidate doing an interview, talking with them, I think if that person being able to show that they're being humble in a way, but at the same time, they can be very smart, they can be very confident on, what they're capable with. I think that's important for me.
Great, thanks, Nellie. Any other thoughts? Okay.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, just a quick one. I think Nellie brought up something interesting, like the dissonance between kind of Eastern culture, Western culture. I find, number one, those things have to be resolved in some way, shape, or form. So you have to figure out a way. So and it's going to be, I think, somewhat unique to each company, but and the culture of that company. But in general, there's a lot of talk about diversity right now. And I would call it, a lot of it's checkbox diversity. Not that I don't agree with it. I actually do agree with all of it. But by definition, it's because it's somewhat prescriptive. It leaves out some of the things that are a little bit more intangible and harder to measure. And I would say that's diversity of thought. So it's good to have somebody, if you use Nellie's example, with Asian culture versus, say, like a Western or American culture in the same room, as long as they have like a shared lexicon within the company, so they can talk about the business in the same way, but come at it from their individual viewpoints and like build on conversations and solutioning. I find that to be the thing that I look for the most in any team, is like, do I get diversity of thought beyond the check boxes?
Yeah.
Do I get diversity of thought? Because I think one of the most destructive things or value limiting things a company can have is a monolithic thought culture. Like, this is the way we do things, and this is the way we do things. And it's like, the best experiences that I had in terms of breaking through big business problems is when you had a lot of people that knew how to talk about the business with a common language, but were coming at it from just multiple viewpoints. And so that'd be the only thing.
How do you interview for that, Doug? I'm curious about that. How do you, in that kind of conversation or case study, however you do it, how do you look for that diversity of thinking?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I've landed on, the perfect process. So typically when I do interviews, 50% will be the standard questions that, HR gives you and says, make sure you hit, these types of questions. And I think there's value in that. It gives you a framework and the structure. But again, I try to get to know people and get to understand kind of their individual backgrounds. Where are they from? What, how did they grow up? What are they really interested in? And then kind of build that conversation into, leading into a business context, and then start asking questions about how do they approach things? Because a lot of times it's the connection between how people were brought up and how they respond in a business environment, which gives you clues as to how they think about things through their own individual and unique angle. So I don't think it's a science. If it was, I'd trademark it and do everything you needed to do to commercialize it, maybe. But to me, it's just like feeling my way towards understanding that person.
Yeah.
And making sure that I don't have that thought already on the team, because it's a puzzle piece, right? You want to fit in new thinking. You don't want to think, buy two puzzle pieces that are like, exactly the same.
Yeah, Ben, were you going to add something?
I was just going to add that whilst I agree that, Doug, that it's not something that you can put into an algorithm entirely. There are a lot of great tools and pieces of technology out there that can give you really good clues about this, and companies are used to doing that at the executive level, and it's quite common for execs to experience psychometrics and lots of what in the past have felt like hoops to jump through. But actually, it's not that expensive or time consuming if you think about it to do it these days. And also, if the outcome is going to be a better understanding between the candidate, the talent, and the company about whether this is going to be a good match. Is the person a good fit for what is needed in this role? It's a fantastic investment to make. So I think we could probably, whilst it's not all there, we could probably be making some good strides forward, already.
Bringing together both those examples with my own, when I was YSC assessed on lots of psychometric tests, etc., to join Diageo, the evaluator, psychologist, looked at my results and said, "Oh dear, dear, dear." You are not a fit for this company. You like to get shit done. And Diageo likes to think about things. And I said, well, you tell them that, because, that's what they say they want. And if they're not serious about it, I don't want to join. And it was a really interesting time where I was risking not getting the job offer, but better earlier rather than figuring it out later.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I assessed at the time is that the person who was my boss, was hiring me, was similar and actually wanted the changes, so that I had the backing to do the transformation that they were asking for with a very different set of experiences. So, you always have to look for those things. If you're different, are you going to get support and, to get the job done? We've got some great comments in the chat on this. Curiosity is something that Michelle, being curious, something Michelle added. Rasheen said EQ, emotional intelligence, is the most important skill for talent today. You can spot the recruiting process when it is missing. Those are great points. Okay,
I was just going to say, I think for me, you can look at lots of different attributes, but every organization values them at different levels in the way that you just described. From, Diageo is this way and wants this. And I think, from both an employer and employee perspective, there is a duty on the employer to work out what it is that they really want and make sure that they filter out those skills. For us, it's none of those things, actually. Well, lots of those things, but it's growth mindset. So adaptability to change. Do they see problems as challenges? Do they blame other people? Do they take it on themselves? Super important in a fast growth environment that we're in, but that might not be appropriate for someone else. And I suppose, I think from an employer perspective, just knowing what it is and what makes you unique and what values you're actually looking for is a great starting point. And then from an employee or potential candidate perspective, it's really asking the probing questions to understand what is the DNA of the company that you're going into and their culture. Because, I truly believe there's a great match for everyone out there, but, like in relationships, not everyone is a good match for everyone. And hopefully these things all work out for the best in the end. But it's not as though there's sort of, one set of criteria that we can all kind of pin our on today and say, yeah, this is what every company needs. Because, like people, organizations are different and complex.
Absolutely. And it requires you as the interviewer or assessor to be unbelievably open-minded about what you might be bringing in terms of expectations and biases, as Doug mentioned. This 55 minutes has flown by, and I'm glad we've taken the audience questions, most of them at least, rather than mine, because I think they were better. Thank you very much, guys. But I do want to get all the panelists an opportunity. This was billed as a top tip session, so I'd love to hear people's top tips for people who are looking to bring the best talent in or make their hiring practices more effective. And I'm just going to go around my screen. Ben, can I start with you, please?
I would say that, well, the thing that marketers have fixed over the last 5 to 10 years is an old power dynamic that used to exist, where it was kind of parent-child. We have, you buy.
Right.
And we fixed that. And the way that we've largely fixed it is through openness and authenticity in brands. And that power dynamic still exists in recruitment, and it's not serving either the candidate or the company. So as marketers, I think my top tip would be to use all of those skills that we've built over the last, however many years as marketers, to open a slightly different conversation with the kind of talent that we want to bring into the organization, that's rooted in openness and authenticity.
Absolutely. That's great insight. Nellie, what are your thoughts?
Well, one thing that I would say that after I joined Google that I learned about hiring is like, you don't necessarily hire people that have the same, the experience from the industry in order to deliver the job. One of the things that we really, really focus on is hiring transferable skill sets. I have to say, when I joined a team, 90% of my team actually doesn't come from the same industry. And I was like, oh, shit. Sorry about my language. But after I started to understand the philosophy on that, it actually works really well. I mean, one of the things is like we really make the team a lot more diverse, because like I be able to think about transferable skill set and hire people from all different kind of industry to join a team. And they all perform, and they will have a different perspective of looking at the same problem. So I think that's one of the things that I think it's really something that helped me a lot in terms of like how to hire, the right talents and the great talents.
Thanks, Nellie. Doug?
Yeah, I think a couple of things, for me in terms of being successful, understand that role definition is really dynamic right now. So if you were to ask me, what a brand manager did, or what's a role description for a brand manager, I would say, given what time period or maturity of the company versus, it's really, really fluid. And I think you really need to work with your partners, whether you're an entrepreneur and you're doing it yourself, and just, you're probably doing it naturally. You're kind of redefining role definition as you go. If you're in a big company, though, you have to have a really good relationship, both with your senior leadership and also with your HR department, and say, this is going to be ever changing. And that will allow those teams to help you recruit for talent that actually fits the needs for now, as opposed to the preconceived notion of what a role might mean. So it's more around, instead of role definition, it's more about experience and skill attribution as it relates to whatever you're trying to design for. And then beyond that, I think the big thing is, design for collaboration. I'm probably using a really dated examples, but Eric Clapton is a really good individual guitarist, but he could never be part of a band. Whereas other great guitarists knew how to play in a band. You want people that, I think someone mentioned it earlier on, you want superstars, but you want superstars that can play well with others and know how that their individual skills and talents actually blend and meld with others. So you have to be very conscious of that. And that's, one of the key things that I think helped me be successful in terms of like holding on to really good talent for long periods of time, is to be very thoughtful about bringing in the right talent with the right skill attributes, and then understanding whether or not they're going to be able to fit within your broader whole. And then finally, if they don't, having the courage to act on making sure you can put them in a place where they actually do belong, as opposed to, suffering through a role that they might not be enjoying. People are people after all. I think everybody has one individual, really great skill. And if it's being tamped down, you owe it to them actually to help them find a place where they can fit, whether it's on your team or outside your team.
Thanks, Doug. Dan, in our last minute.
In less than a minute. Well, I can't really better anything that Doug has just said, because I love that, and exactly what Nellie and Ben had also built on. But let me just attempt to build on it in a slightly different way. to the first point, or to the second point, actually, about hiring collaborative people. Actually, to the first point about skill transferability, Yuval Harari writes about how the job titles that we have today, our grandparents wouldn't recognize them.
Right.
And because of Ray Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns, it's almost beyond doubt the job titles that exist in 5 years will not ever have been seen before, because it's happening, this change in what's required in organizations is happening faster than you've ever seen. So 100% agreed with that first piece. And I think on the second, using Eric Clapton as the example, I'll never forget that brilliant TED talk by Margaret Heffernan, where she talks about that experiment that William Demure did on chickens, because you can experiment with chickens easier than you can with humans. And on the one hand, and I love an experiment, you get group A, population A, where they breed chickens normally, and in B, they breed the super productive chickens with other super productive chickens, which is measured by the output of their eggs. And after 5 or 6 successive generations, at the end of this experiment, you have on the first, or the control, you have a regular chicken population, and on the right, you have 3 super chickens who have pecked everyone else to death. So a bit macabre, but I think it brings that point home about bringing people into your organization that are going to work well, because if we can't collaborate and bring our skill sets together, then what are we as marketers? So
that is a memorable example. Thank you guys very much. Before you guys in the audience, you wonderful people, leave, please answer the feedback form, the poll that just came up on your list. And while you're doing that, let me thank our speakers very much. They all, I think, are entirely dedicated to bringing in and nurturing top talent. And I think we've heard some great ideas on how to do it. Ask yourselves, are you doing these things? What ideas can you incorporate? Please have a look at the Marketing Society webpage. There are so many great events coming up. Next week, Mark Adams, the VP of Innovation at Vice, is going to look at Web 3.0 and talk about how the fundamental principles for the next era of the internet are changing and what it means for brands. Similar kind of what does the future look like on February 15th. We'll be talking about that, so you can find those. And the other thing, for anybody who's interested in hiring people or being hired, look at the Marketing Society Careers channel page. We have a great offer from Ben at Zigzag. He's partnering with us to offer our members the opportunity to post their roles for free. So watch out for a code coming into your inbox. And I think with their promise of a better recruitment experience, that's really, really compelling. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you'll join us for future events. And thank you again to our panelists who have done a great job.